Hey guys, this is National Master Kevin Yang back at it with another video. So I was telling you last time, I said this knight on d5, it kind of felt misplaced, but it kind of felt like in the right square. So remember how I said at the same time that it looks in such a great position, it really only has one square to go to, right? So after f4, c6, knight to b4, a5. So the knight gets trapped there. So actually the best move here was to play f takes pawn, or not f takes pawn, f takes e5. And so after c takes d5, e takes d5, b5, bishop to b3, knight to c6. And after d6, knight to e6. This is what had to happen for white to, let's say, stay in the game. But in the game, I told you I said c6, knight b4, now a5. So the knight is trapped. And after f takes e5, I asked you why I don't take on b4. Why? Why don't I take on b4? Well, it's somewhat hard to calculate, but here's why. A takes b4, and now rook takes f7. This is what I calculated. Rook takes, and now rook f1. And all of a sudden, there's so much pressure here. What do I have to do? I have to play the move king to h7. Rook takes f7, queen to g5, and I didn't quite like my continuation after rook to f8. It felt very dislikable, you know. My pieces are not very well coordinated on the back file, and everyone just seemed just not great, you know. So instead, I said I can't do that. So I played the move queen to e7. I said, if you take here, I'm going to take here, and if you play rook to f1, I'm going to bring my bishop out to e6. But here, white could have played knight to d5. So an even better move to defend f7 is knight to c7. And if rook takes f7, rook takes f7, rook to f1, there is now the exclamation move bishop to e6, just interfering with the diagonal, just providing the trade and just having fun. So now we know knight to c7 is probably even better. But I played queen to e7, the second to best. And c3 happened. I said thank you, but I will take the knight. Takes d4, and now bishop to e6. The reason I played bishop e6 is I wanted to say, hey friend, what about d5? Right? But all of a sudden, takes, I can take here, and check. Bingo, bango, right? So it's not just one, it's not just threatening the bishop, there's also a check. And this is a very sneaky way to pick up a pawn. So our friend, Annieg001, didn't do that. So after b3, I said knight to c7. Because I just want to stabilize, I want to get my pieces out. And after queen to h5, I said, let's play b5. Let's get our bishops traded, get my knight on a good square, threaten the pawn. Rook f3, knight takes d4, rook to g3, very, very interesting attack. Here I play king h8 for safety measure. Just in case if queen takes h6 happens, I could have, kept my eye out on this fork, but I said, for safety measures, I will go to h8. Rook to f1, and now rook takes a2. e6, I don't even bother taking on e6, I play knight to e2. I suggest taking on g3 next move, and our friend Annieg001 resigned. So what really happened here, right? How did our friend Annieg001 lose? Well, to be honest, knight to d5. It it felt like, the intuitive place to put the knight. It felt right? It was in the center. But at the same time, it was hard. It was slowly beginning to see why this knight eventually became really hard to dig out. Because when we get to this square, you'll notice that, white has only one square. So it's very hard if the knights don't trade. So after c6 and getting to trap that knight was mainly why I won this game. But later on, I was able to really crack down on the doubled pawns here, right? So the doubled pawns are sometimes good, but they're sometimes really easy to take advantage of. And in this game, I got them, I won them, and I fork them. So, next game against none other than Annieg001, e4, e5. This was a Italian game, as we saw before, but instead, something we haven't seen in a while, a sort of knight g5 variation. Going for this f7 square, having some fun. So after d5, e takes d5, knight to a5. Now at this point, I know the main line is bishop to b5 check, and I've seen so many grandmasters play it, but I have to take this line out of something that one of my former coaches gave me. The move d3. It's a move, it keeps the pawn alive, and it does a good job. So the main line here is h6, knight f3, e4, queen e2, knight takes, d takes, and bishop to c5. Knight after d2, castles, castles, bishop to g4, queen to e1, something like this. And then eventually white gets to set up this very interesting setup where white maintains the pawn, right? But at the same time, black has like a space advantage. So it could be, it might not be so great for white, but at least it's playable. Here's the other line. So the other line goes bishop to b5, c6, d takes, b takes, bishop to d3, or I could play queen to f3. So bishop to d3, knight to d5, trying to go to f4, knight to f3, bishop to d6. So this is the other line. Something like this, but both lines work. So I played d3, knight takes, pawn takes, bishop to g4. I played f3, bishop to f5, and I said, let's get the queen to e2 and threaten e5. Bishop to d6, now I bring the other knight out. So this is the benefit of being one pawn up. It's simply that you don't do too much to worry about material anymore. Now it's about getting the pieces out, trying to stay active, and that is what you do. Castles, knight to e4, queen to e7 now. This I kind of felt like was the biggest mistake of the game. Bishop to g5, allowing this just really deadly. Bishop takes e4, knight takes, queen to d8, bishop takes, g takes, and we see the doubled pawn chain again, right? And it could be great, but I'm going to make it not great by playing the move g4. Why do I do this? Why do you think I played g4? Well, this was both a positionally good move and a prophylactic move. So what is a prophylactic move? It's a move that prevents your opponent from doing what they want. So here by playing g4, I prevent black from playing f5, right? So black wants to do that. I play g4 instead. And what this does is it creates a very solid square for white to maneuver towards. It creates this sort of attack that white needs. So after rook b8, I castled queenside, and here I also have another threat, c5 and d6 to trap this bishop. So after c6, I took on c6, and now all of a sudden there's this pin here, and that is good night. So what did we learn this game? Well, the opening I would say is okay. Not sure if knight takes c4 is a good move per se, but I don't know. Maybe there was h6, bishop d6, c6, and something to do with releasing the tension in the middle. That would have been good. But developing was okay. It kind of just felt like, being one pawn up, I had a better time dealing with the position, right? It kind of felt like I was supposed to be up a whole pawn. But in reality, I just took one of black's pawns. So I kind of feel like somehow black should have given me a harder time to keep that pawn here. But I was able to very much solidify this pawn chain, play g4, and take on c6, and all of a sudden the game is over. So, next game against Annieg001, 2010. e4, b6, my favorite opening, the Owens defense. Right, just putting pressure against the center. And now e5 happens. And after e5, I can take on g2, right? But I decided, you know what? Let's give our friend Anton a chance. Because at the same time that, I really want to play bishop takes g2 now, e takes f6, bishop takes g1, or not g1, h1, f takes g7, rook to g8, and let's say after queen to g4, well, there's queen to f6. So this g7 pawn is going to be gone, so queen to h5 could happen, rook takes g7, castles queenside, and it gets all weird because there's bishop to h6. So, I don't know, it's hard to say, but what I would say is bishop takes g2 is still probably the best move in the position. However, I played bishop takes c3, and after bishop takes c3, I could still play bishop takes g2. But I said I can't be so cruel to Annie G, right? So I played knight to d5, queen to g4. So after knight to d5, bishop to d2 is possible, especially because we're preventing the knight from going to f4, right? So that's one part of bishop to d2. And number two, this bishop isn't so bad of a bishop, right? If the bishop got to g5 and was able to control this diagonal, that would be really good. So keeping the bishop was good, but queen to g4 is also a great move. So here I played g6 here, and g6 wasn't so great. I mean, what I should have done is I should have played maybe castles. I don't know. It kind of felt a little bit risky, given that these two boys were going to relocate and really point towards my king side. So I really didn't know at the time. Played g6, bishop to e4, and here I said f5, right? I said f5, but I didn't play it. Why? Because I was in a simul, and at first I thought in this position, what happens if bishop takes g6, right? Here's where thought takes, queen takes, king f8, and the move d5. And you might be like, what is going on here? Well, to be honest, the bishop is threatening the knight, and there's no really concrete way to protect this knight without losing the rook. So I have to lose one or the other. So probably my best bet is rook to g8, and after trading here, and after something like bishop takes d5, I would say it's about even, given that we have the g2 pawn, but at the same time, white has this idea here. So I'll leave it there, and I'll see you in the next video.